Very happy today to introduce Jerrold Mcgrath. He's going to be giving us a talk that's a little different. So what we had before in previous sessions, he's going to talk about how art and artificial intelligence blend together. Jerrold is currently the program lead for the Goethe-Institut in Toronto, the Algorithmic Culture series. Their focus is on cross-sector collaborations around issues of broad social concerns, such as artificial intelligence, equity in response to the pandemic, hope and hopelessness, and the digital diaspora. He's also currently the managing director at UKAI Project, which is a space that connects artists together, and a founder of the Ferment AI group, which is an incubator for artists as well. In addition, he is a BMW Foundation responsible leader and ambassador for Berlin's State Festival. A former program director at the Banff Centre for Arts and Creativity in Artscape Launchpad. He's currently writing his first book. It's called In Praise of Disorder. So thanks very much for joining us today, Jerrold, and please everyone join me in welcoming Jerrold.
Hello, everybody, and thank you for this, and thank you for the invitation. It's always a bit funny, even though I'm not actually in Kingston. You grow up in Kingston, surrounded by the university as a I don't know. I guess it's like Trudeau's description, right, of being in bed with an elephant. So you become very aware of the activities there. But then when I became aware of the Ingenuity Lab and the work that's happening, I was like, oh my gosh, this is incredible. And so the opportunity to speak to a group of people that are curious about these issues is wonderful. What I'm going to do today is share a little bit about the work that we're doing through the Goethe-Institut around algorithmic culture, share a few projects that I think are potentially interesting and point to some of the directions that artists are taking AI in. It won't be as in-depth. Like I have a deep curiosity about how artists are using AI, so I'm happy to share near the end some other projects that I think are doing fun and interesting things. But more, I want to sort of present a broad view of the potential directions that we see this exploration taking, and touch on a few of the current, let's say, newsworthy notes within the arts world around automated decision making, cognitive technologies, and all of that. Before I do, I just want to share a short story. So my last name is Mcgrath. I grew up hearing stories about how my family, the Mcgraths, were responsible for a large fire that destroyed a town. And we never really thought much of the story. We thought it was just my father's way of poking fun at our family's sort of history of misfortune. But what I've discovered recently is that the Mcgraths actually were settled up in an area near South Porcupine in Northern Ontario. And in the early 20th century, they were settlers there, and they were clearing brush to make room for gardens and small farming. And this was common practice. There were dozens of small fires being burned, but they were doing this in July of 1916, which was a particularly hot and dry season. And some of the fires managed to link up, and then they connected to the railway corridor, which led to the Matheson fire. Now, the Matheson fire, who are not familiar, is the largest man-made fire in North American history. It was 500,000 acres, 2,000 square kilometers. They estimate close to 1,200 people were killed in it. And likely the number is higher than that, mainly because Indigenous communities were undercounted in the casualty tolls. When my family when the immediate crisis had subsided, they took stock of what was left, and they decided to move south. And so they started walking, following the rail line toward Toronto. Eventually, they were picked up by emergency response, and through a train were brought south, and that's where they settled. And the reason that I share this story is one, because I think it's interesting, and I'll revisit this a bit later, that my family never felt a particular sense of connection or entanglement with the environment on which they drew sustenance. So while they left and many of the other settlers left, Indigenous communities and Anishinaabe people in the area were asked to help recover. And so I tell this story because it for me is a useful way of acknowledging acknowledging the contributions of the original stewards on the lands on which we all rest, who are also the present and future stewards of the natural environment on which we rely. And also just to draw attention to our own commitments and our own obligations to spaces that we're in, and also how easily it is to be alienated from landscapes. My family left Ireland, they came to Northern Ontario, they left Northern Ontario, came to Toronto, and we continue to move. So I hope this can serve as an acknowledgement. I am in Toronto, home of the Mississauga of the Credit, Haudenosaunee and Anishinaabe people, Métis people, and First Nations from across Turtle Island. Also home to many nations currently, all of us together in the wampum with one spoon, committed to sharing the wealth of the natural world around us now and in the future. So I want to start just with a book. So Junichiro Tanizaki was a Japanese writer, and in the 1930s, 1933, he wrote a book called In Praise of Shadows. I first became familiar with it because it's a well-respected tomb in the design world, or tome in the design world, but it's a tomb as well, maybe. But it's also interesting because it's a very short book, In Praise of Shadows, but he's writing and lamenting the loss of a way of seeing the world brought about by Western technologies. So Tanizaki was a huge fan of kabuki and no and other traditional Japanese crafts. And he was seeing the introduction of Western technologies, specifically chrome, electric lights, capsule pens, and how that was making unavailable a certain way of understanding beauty. So Japanese calligraphy, normally done with a feather and handmade inks, was being transferred over to capsule pens. Kabuki and no theater was traditionally lit by lanterns or candles. That was being replaced by electric lights that provided a lot of clarity, but didn't allow for an aesthetic of reticent subtlety to be exhibited. And he didn't see any hope. He didn't imagine that there was any way through this, because he understood that the Western technologies were backed by significant power, but also that they were affordable and they solved problems in a very efficient way. And so a lot of this work is responding to a similar question. As more and more of our culture is organized and categorized and selected by automated systems, what ideas of beauty, what ideas of a beautiful life become lost? And obviously there are gains to be made. There are amazing things happening, making use of algorithmic technologies in the arts and culture sector. But there is also the risk of losing some ways of knowing the world. And that's sort of the conversation that I'm hoping to begin here. There are certain assumptions that inform this work, and I just want to be upfront about what those assumptions are. Because none of these assumptions are necessarily true. I mean, that's why they're assumptions, but they hopefully provide some insights into the thinking at Goethe and UKAI about this work. We understand culture as a collective inheritance, meaning it's something we can draw upon to respond to challenges that we face. I mentioned before that my family is from Ireland. They left Ireland as a result of the potato famine. For those who don't know the history, potatoes, which were brought from the Andes, became a staple crop in Ireland, which then allowed wheat and other grains to be sent back to the landowners in England. Now, in the Andes, potatoes were grown in these really spotty patches with multiple species of potatoes coexisting and abutting against wild versions. So if an infestation, a bacterial infestation arrived, some of the species would be particularly vulnerable, but overall the potato would be resilient, and people growing potatoes could plant more of those that were resistant. In Ireland, that was not an option. All of the potatoes were lumper potatoes. They were bred asexually, and so when an infestation arose, the crop was completely decimated. This was compounded by the fact that laws in place at the time meant that corn being shipped from the United States couldn't be received, and the English owners of the land in Ireland insisted that grains be sent back. And so the population of Ireland has not recovered to the 1848 levels, and my family was one of many that left. And I think this is an interesting sort of corollary to the work of culture and agriculture, is that when when our culture is increasingly focused on a narrow set of values, it may be perfectly equipped to deal with the challenges that are current at the time of that selection, but they may leave us vulnerable in the future to shocks and challenges of which we can't even possibly imagine. And so one of our assumptions is that our culture today is increasingly focused on a narrow set of priorities around efficiency and growth, otherwise known as scale. And absolutely nothing wrong with efficiency and growth as priorities, and technology is often leveraged in order to ensure that things get bigger and more efficient. The challenge is that when those assumptions start to take on the quality of a moral position, it can squeeze out other ways of knowing the world and other values and priorities in the solutions that we develop. And so the algorithmic culture work is around, one, it's around drawing attention to some of these invisible patterns that we may not be fully aware of, and two, encouraging folks that would like to explore the use of technologies in new ways to be able to center different ontological and epistemological priorities in the work that they do. So as I say, moral positions of capitalism are occupying new terrains. Obviously efficiency and growth are really great things if we're talking about pharmaceuticals or about food production or even production of commodities to make us more comfortable. Their application to academia or to natural resources, there's a little more question there about whether it's the appropriate venue for those assumptions to take hold. And so this isn't a critique of the technology. Rather, the technology is being deployed to amplify these positions and sometimes squeeze out, either intentionally or unintentionally, other ways of knowing the world. And so I refer to these as centripetal forces. These are forces that are trying to finalize, to lock down, to totalize, often in the pursuit of security and predictability going forward. And I'll come back to that in a little bit. And the reason that I'm interested in art at the center of this is that art is sort of special in its historical willingness to select other values to put at the center of its work. So art is often generated in contradiction to the broader culture. And so certain pathways are more easily explored through art than they are through other thought traditions. So centrifugal energy is energy that can disorder some of the assumptions we have about how our culture is organized. And so what I'll be looking at today is the tension between centrifugal and centripetal forces in the art world. And that's really what we're seeing. A lot of the tension right now in the art world is those who really want to maximize benefit within the existing set of logics that define how art is produced and shared. And then folks that are looking to disorient or disorder how culture is understood. And also we're seeing in many cases how art and culture can be used to mythologize ideas of growth and efficiency. So after Barthas, this idea that we come to think of the idea of growth and efficiency as becoming as a natural thing because of the stories we tell about it. So my belief is, and my assumption is, that this is where the future of the arts will be mapped. It's centripetal forces seeking stability and consistency, and centrifugal forces disordering our cultural assumptions. And the tensions between these two sort of urges are defining the trajectory of art and culture at the moment. And algorithmic culture and AI is a site of inquiry into this, because it can serve to amplify certain positions, and it can serve to reach and do things that previously were not possible. So what is algorithmic culture? So our definition is that algorithmic culture is the process whereby the logic of big data and computation comes to change how culture is perceived and experienced. So last year in May, Glenn Whale and Jerrold Mcgrath argued in Wired that AI is, it's the quote, best understood as a political and social ideology rather than as a basket of algorithms. So this ideology holds that a small technical elite can and should develop technologies that will replace human agency and judgment. And this ideology of AI understands individuals as objects requiring optimization and control. And John Cheney-Lippold, who wrote We Are Data, it's a great book, he offers that when our embodied individualities get ignored, we increasingly lose control, not just over life, but over how life itself is defined. So I'm less concerned about machines that exceed human intelligence. Like, I understand why people talk about this. This isn't really our primary concern. What we're troubled by is the idea that humans are increasingly being asked to behave more like machines in service to the liberating ambitions of growth and efficiency. So a simple example of this is sort of automated tellers at machines, where if you do not accommodate the system and structure that's in place to ensure that that automation is efficient, you can cause a great deal of chaos in the system and frustration for other people, as evidenced by any senior who decides to have a long conversation with a cashier or is unable to use the machinery that's available to them in the system. So rather than creating an algorithm that thinks like a human, the goal, it increasingly appears, is to automate us. And notions of autonomy, identity, and community are being reworked under the influence of artificial intelligence. And again, I'll repeat, we should avoid blaming the algorithms for the current situation. Like, technology is an expression of the objectives of the broader culture. And the work we assign our algorithms to do, it reflects the things we value. The questions we ask them to solve, the data we feed them, and how we choose to use them. But the objectification of human subjects will have profound and material impacts outside of the digital. We hope to, so through the work at the Goethe-Institut, we're seeking to explore these impacts through underlying experiences of AI. So on the body, on landscapes, so on the natural environment around us, and through different experiences of diaspora. And the possibility of defying a unitary logic of utility, it rests in reconnecting to lives, to bodies, to landscapes, and to cultures as subjects in dialogue with each other and the world. So really drawing a lot from Bakhtin, who was a Russian, I guess, philosopher of culture, and the need to be able to hold multiple perspectives, multiple subjects in dialogue with each other, and using that structure as a way of entering into conversation around a particular issue. Often we see with AI, it's a yes, no, it's a good, bad, it's very polarized, and that's not a particularly helpful framework. What we're looking to do is to bring in hundreds, thousands of potential interpretations, and that structure become a starting point for greater exploration. Not trying to reduce individual stories to a polarized yes or no, but rather allowing those stories to exist in and of themselves and to use them as source material for further exploration. So much of the debate about AI, and I'm sure you all know this, and this is true within the artistic community as well, it prioritizes the exploration of theoretical and ideological principles. So particularly the ethics that should underpin policies and public interest. There's a need though to distinguish between general knowledge of these invisible socio-technical forces and a particular knowledge of how they will manifest. So we see an opportunity to contribute by exploring a shift from rationality to relationality in AI. And through dialogic processes and dialogic perspectives to provide new insights into events. So things that actually happen, as opposed to our interpretations of things that we may believe to be true. So AI can often be driven by a spoken or unspoken need to understand people in the world as finalized objects of an automated process. So exploration in our case is multi-subject and multi-epistemic. And we're hoping to create structures of meaning creation and action. And by placing subjects into these relational structures of interpretation, we then become answerable to what happens next. I think one of the challenges we face is that although people have strong opinions about AI and cognitive technologies, they don't actually have a way of accessing it through their bodies or through their lived experiences. And so they don't feel answerable to what happens. Like, they don't feel accountable to the decisions being made in their name. And so that's part of the work. So UKAI is the organization that I work at, the managing director at. For those who aren't familiar, UKAI is actually a kind of fishing. It's popular and not popular, but it originated in Southeast Asia, China, and Japan. UKAI is the Japanese term for it. In it, it's at night, and this is a picture of UKAI fishing happening. There'll be these baskets full of pine that are on fire, and the light brings sweet fish up to the surface. There are cormorants, which are these large black birds that have metal rings around their neck. The rings are attached to a string, and then an usho, or a fisher person in the boat, holds the strings. The cormorants, they swallow fish, but they can't swallow them all the way down because the ring chokes them. Once their neck is full up, they pull the bird into the boat, they dump the fish that are in its throat into a basket or a bucket, and they serve the community and tourists with the gains of the river. I first experienced this probably 15 years ago, maybe longer, and it was completely outside the categories that I had to describe the world. Like, I didn't know what to do with it. And there was a desire to sort of lean into it, to experience it directly, but at the time, I felt the need to judge. And so I turned to a friend and I said, oh, it's a bit cruel, yeah? And she kind of gave me a look I didn't understand. And then later I came to regret that decision. I was confronted by something that was intentionally inefficient. It had been sustained for close to 1,500 years, was beautiful, but was completely outside the categories for how one acquires food in a community. And so I needed to sort it, to make it good or to make it bad. And so UKAI, the organization, is an opportunity to explore contexts, works, culture that don't neatly fit within that good-bad divide, and hopefully create space for new knowledge to be created. Now, just to go over the centripetal side of this thing, so we operate with the assumption that knowledge is created and evolves as events are compared to our existing ideas. So I have an idea about how we get fish. I'm confronted by an event, and then I have to reconsider what I believe to be true. When events line up with what we think we already know about what is true or real or desirable, our confidence in our knowledge of the world is enhanced. I'm like, great, this confirms what I already know. Confusion and discomfort can emerge when events are incompatible with the ideas we have. So to me, centripetal forces are ones that reaffirm or confirm the ideas we hold about the world, and centrifugal forces are ones that challenge or confuse our categories for organizing the world. So artists have long played an important role in inviting us to step into this discomfort and make sense of the changes happening around us. So the facts on which we build our algorithms, they reflect their designers' understanding of the world and historical patterns of inclusion and exclusion. A self-driving car, and I'm sure none of this is new to all of you, that is unaware of the fact of black faces will lack the ability to respond appropriately when it encounters one. So the ideas that inform the design of our automated systems, they have far-reaching consequences. And when we value scale, efficiency, growth, our solutions will tend to favor these characteristics. More ad revenue, more clicks, more purchases. And then there are ethical dimensions to both the events that we interpret and the ideas that we elevate. But if our social, economic, political, cultural, whatever systems start to view us simply as biological machines in need of regulation and control, then what becomes of the ideas that we use to make sense of the world and develop these systems in the first place? So I'll touch briefly just on Václav Havel and Power of the Powerless, and then we'll jump into some of the work. So Václav Havel was a dramatist and a politician in the Czech Republic, and he describes the experience of living in a post-totalitarian system where everyone must live within a lie. He observes they need not accept the lie. It's enough for them to have accepted their life with it and in it. For by this very fact, individuals confirm the system, fulfill the system, make the system, are the system. So Havel's describing a culture where, because of fear of reprisal by the agents and institutions of the system, true desires are not expressed. An effective response to this form of control he calls living in truth. And this is where you perform the awareness of the dissonance between what's being publicly professed and your own beliefs. The challenge with algorithmic culture, and this is where I think the art comes into it, is that it often removes the potential for dissonance because it selects against facts that conflict with the ideas we already hold before we are aware of them. Living in truth is only possible when we possess ideas that might encounter events with which they are in conflict. In the digital, ideas confront other ideas frequently and violently, as we all see every day. But that these ideas be eventful, like that they be tied to actual events in the world, it isn't a requirement. All they really care about is the attention. So uncomfortable facts ask us to be critical of both the evidence and our ideas about what it means. And algorithms, though, they can ensure that uncomfortable facts are removed before we are unsettled by them. So the algorithm protects us from the possibility of encountering experiences that might reshape our theories of the world. And so the cauliflower dilemma. I have a daughter, she's 12. This isn't her. She would be very angry if I included her picture here. There's a fair bit of research that it requires at least 8 feedings of cauliflower before a child will be comfortable enough to eat it regularly in the future. So if we operate from an assumption that things that they don't want to eat should be removed from the menu, no child would ever develop a taste for cauliflower. Similarly, if we only ate the foods that we ate as children, we would likely have very unhealthy diets. It would be very pleasurable, but we wouldn't actually develop the maturity of taste to be able to to process and work with new foods. Richard Sennett was a sociologist, or he is a sociologist. In 1970, he wrote a book called The Uses of Disorder, in which he talked about communities that are isolated from conflict. Like, so when we're adolescents, we develop these personas that allow us to filter information without having to process the emotional side of it, right? So if I'm like a jock and I was not, or a nerd, or whatever these sort of stereotypes are that we take on in high school, we use them to filter experience. I don't have to self-reflect on how I feel about this, because my persona does it for me. We mature and we discover that these personas are inadequate, like they don't actually serve our needs very well. And so we get rid of them and we develop and become, mature human beings with our own taste. His argument was that in communities where you're never confronted with uncomfortable evidence, we can actually maintain those personas well into adulthood. And so one of the fears, or one of the things we talk about, is the same can apply to culture. If we were only exposed to stories and ideas about which we already are comfortable, we are never challenged to interrogate our beliefs about what is true in the world. NFTs, and we'll come back to this a little bit later, I see as being on the centripetal side of the conversation. The idea between non-fungible tokens is that the problem of replicability and sharing of digital content should be fixed. And by creating tokens that provide basically a trustless confirmation of ownership, is an effective way of generating revenue for artists. And it has been. I've seen a lot of artists that have benefited from this. I've seen, Pussy Riot and Russia is doing a lot of fundraising around NFTs. There's a lot of good things happening. But I will argue that the urge to NFTs is connected to this idea to finalize, this idea to totalize, the idea to put concretely in place who the owner of this asset is indefinitely. We'll look at the other side of this in terms of DAOs and blockchain solutions a little bit later. But just to say, it's not the technology itself, because they're all relying on the same underlying sort of blockchain technology. It's the applications that are being used in the art world to connect to it. So there was an expert seminar on culture, creativity, and artificial intelligence that was done in Slovenia, but it was Europe-wide in 2018. And these were some of the findings about why the arts and AI needed to be together. I think some of them are quite interesting. The bottom one is the one that I actually want to draw the most attention to. So many artists and artistic collectives are active in the field of AI and technology, focusing their attention specifically to incubating functional alternative models of various social and democratic processes. That space is seemingly the only laboratory for genuine social innovation in AI, and it deserves serious attention and support. So if you look at who is doing interesting work around DAOs and alternative economies and alternative organizing, a lot of the conversation is centered in cultural organizations and artists. This is particularly true in Europe, not so much in North America yet, although UKAI recently received confirmation of a large Canada Council grant to explore these very questions. So the other thing I just want to point to here is that the arts are interesting not just in the products that they produce, the outputs they produce, the artifacts they produce, but also in that they are often the front line in experimenting with forms of organizing that are made possible through the technologies that we're talking about here. And the reason for that, of course, is desperate precarity. They often are living on sort of the razor's edge of sustainability. And so there's a greater willingness, A, to experiment, and B, to center different values in the conversations that occur. Now I want to look at the other side, because I think this is where the interesting stuff happens, and we'll jump into some artworks around this. Without new experiences, we're left alone with our ideas, which themselves can be exploited. Some algorithms have learned that exposure to different ideas can fuel a kind of moral outrage that keeps clicking, and so we get things that sort of scratch that itch. Nuance, concreteness, they're not profitable. And facts are elided in extreme positions, or extreme versions of different ideas are presented to ensure that we remain emotionally engaged with a particular platform or community. And those responsible will argue that there's no intention there, but intention isn't really the issue. What we're interested in is how might artists work within these structures of testing and testing and testing to find approaches that allow for different evidence to be created. So our ideas about what things signify, they're assembled from our experiences. And we're not born with the skills to organize the facts of the world, but we develop them as we interact with others in the broader culture. And this is where I think the centrifugal work is most interesting. It's artists that are creating experiences that might not otherwise be possible. Yeah, I'll jump from there. So Byung-Chul Han is a German philosopher. Well, originally from South Korea, but writes in German. And he does a lot of work around technology and the broader culture. And one of his arguments is that if we want to see a greater polyphony or plurality of perspectives, we need folks that are willing to put forward a theory. And a theory meaning a way of understanding the world that's unproven in our day-to-day life. And he argues that theory offers more than a model or a hypothesis to be proven or disproven by means of experimentation. Theory represents an essential decision that causes the world to appear wholly different. Theory is a primordial decision which determines what counts and what does not. And so at the core of this sort of artistic exploration is this idea that we need to present different theories about the world. And then we need to make them manifest in the artistic products that we generate. And I'm going to give you an example here. But before I do, I'll just say this idea of phenomenologies of time is something I've been doing a lot of work around. There's Michelle Wright. She wrote The Physics of Blackness, amazing thinker. She writes about time as being ice melting outwards. And she's specifically talking about the experience of the Afro diaspora and how we often assume that we share a common sense of temporality. But the reality is that where we are contextually determines how we perceive time. And she uses the example of the revolutionary in Haiti, whose name escapes, Sanité Belair, who in the 18th century, as a part of the Haitian Revolution against the French colonizers, was captured. And then when she was killed by firing squad, she refused to blindfold and she stared into the eyes of her executioners. That story became extremely popular in the American South thereafter. And that story was very differently told within white families and Black families. And there's evidence that Harriet Tubman was informed by those stories, which then informed her response to the conditions that she experienced in the South. Her story, of course, then inspired revolutionaries in the Bolshevik Revolution in Russia. So this is not a straight line by any sense of the word, but it's an understanding of time as something that's cascading outwards. I've done a lot of work in Indigenous contexts out in Alberta during my time with the Banff Centre. There are phenomenologies of time that are built on circles. This idea that we're in a constant returning, and so any desire to accelerate, to go forward faster is ridiculous because you're just going to end up where you were. So why would you bother wanting to do something more quickly? And then, of course, there's the modern conception of time as a straight line. The future is better than the present, and anything that gets us from the present to the future more quickly is necessarily good. Now, a lot of the solutions that are being developed in AI are built around this idea that time is a straight line, or at least that the future in some ways can be controlled or mediated. And so what that means is that scale, like this idea of growth and efficiency, becomes a natural offshoot of this. Like if we imagine that either the future is scary or the future is better, then we need to do things now to either prevent the worst possible outcomes or to get us to the best outcome as quickly as possible. But there are artists who are working in different approaches, and I want to share one piece here by Howie Tsui. Howie Tsui is a Canadian artist through China and Nigeria. And I'll explain it a little bit and then I'll share it, but essentially what he wanted to do was to capture wuxia scrolls, and I'm sure I'm pronouncing that wrong, which were scrolls that were not meant to be read in a straight line, that described the cycles of revolution that were naturally inherent in a state. And the argument was that if power becomes corrupt, the people will rise up, fight against that, but they themselves will then be punished for violating the order, and then they die, and then the cycle renews. And so he created this piece called Retainers of Anarchy, and I'll just share a few minutes of it to give you a sense. And just to say mechanically how this was created, all of the elements are, and there's no AI involved in this, but they're algorithmically placed. So the music, the story elements, and their positioning is done through not a randomized algorithm, because certain elements need to be in connection. And then it's projected onto a massive, I think it's close to 50 feet long, and screen. And this has been shown in a variety of locations, but just give me a sec here. And I'll try to get my sound going as well, because it's important. I'm getting a network error, which is always fun. All right, good. Okay. Sorry, I tend to sing to myself as I do this as well. Share sound, optimize for video clip, share. So one of the reasons that I find this work so remarkable is one, that he's made a conscious decision to center a different understanding of time. But two is that he had to build most of the tools to do this on his own. The existing technology simply wasn't compatible with what he was trying to do. And so he spent a lot of time and effort developing techniques to be able to portray this. And although we may not like ascribe to a phenomenology of time that's circular, I don't think any of us would want to deny that this is a legitimate way of understanding the world. But when the tools and approaches don't sort of acknowledge or celebrate this, we actually lose out on a lot. And I think the ethical side of it, obviously, like if we're developing technology that can't see Black faces and therefore acts differently in response to encountering Black bodies, like obviously this is a huge issue of justice and ethics. But I think there are other cultural implications that may not be as visible, that certain ways of knowing the world are harder to capture with the tools that we use. And I'll just, because I want to make sure that we have time here, I just want to share one more thing and then we can jump into some conversation.
10 minutes left there, Joe.
What's that?
Got about 10 minutes left.
Yeah, great. And I just want to make sure that folks can sort of jump in if they have specific questions around parts of this. Sorry. So many screens on a Friday. Where are we? There we are. Okay. So, this is a sort of a quick one. This is more around selection, but just this idea that in the UK, the Cabinet Office was using an automated due diligence tool. And this automated due diligence tool it prioritized large institutions, but excluded institutions in local communities that were valued locally. So again, just this idea that the culture that we have available to us is heavily influenced by the assumptions that are burned into the algorithms that we use. Here's a quick project here called Migration. We were working with performing organizations, performance organizations, music, theater, dance, etc., that were looking to go online. Often both the platforms and the techniques for translating work online are centered in Western European approaches or commercial approaches. So if you're a taiko group, no one's going to listen to taiko, like the Japanese drumming, which I love, but no one's going to listen to it on Spotify. And so we work to prototype techniques to be able to authentically translate culturally specific non-Western performance into digital environments. And the fact that there's so little support for this type of work suggests a huge opportunity and a huge tension within the sector. And lastly, I'll just, well, actually not lastly, there's one thing I want to share after this. This idea of interiority. I'm a huge Twin Peaks fan, but we don't need to worry too much about that. Interiority is this idea that we believe that each other person that we interact with has an inner life similar to our own. And I don't know if you've been accused of being a bot online before or something like this has happened to you, but it's increasingly the case that we are denying others an interior life. And so the challenge with artists working with AI and algorithmic technologies is that it often responds to what happens on the surface. And so how do we then go about developing approaches that allow for an interior, both my own and the interior of another, to be held? So one of the great gifts of novels or novelization, which can be in theater and elsewhere, is that allows multiple subjects to be in discourse with each other and allows us to occupy them and see the world through their perspectives. The idea of intimacy being that we see ourselves through the eyes of the one that we love or the one that we care for. A lot of these sort of moments of interiority are being obviated by the approaches that we use to share art and content. And so I want to share one last one last sort of example here. How many of you are familiar with CodeMiko? All right, so this is one of these wonderful situations where, like, it's a demographic thing. I'm going to share a short little video about CodeMiko because I think she embodies in many ways where I see art going, particularly as it relates to augmented intelligence and artificial intelligence. We may get an ad here, we'll see. It's a YouTube video.
Hello human friends. I am Kuboto, and welcome to my channel where I report on everything I've learned about your species. Today, my research has led me spiraling down one particular rabbit hole, driven by a single, burning question. Okay, who is CodeMiko? CodeMiko is a just chatting streamer on Twitch. When in human form, she refers to herself as the technician.
I am the technician for CodeMiko. I mocap CodeMiko, I voice CodeMiko, I make CodeMiko, I do everything CodeMiko related.
Miko, on the other hand, is the name of her 3D virtual avatar.
Hello, everybody!
Which she controls using a motion capture suit and face tracking technology. Hold up, let me back up for a minute. Before streaming on Twitch, the technician had 4 years of experience doing research and development in live animation. After which, she started working on the Miko character in January of 2020. She even crafted a backstory where Miko is an NPC who wants to be in a AAA game but can't, due to a glitch in her system. So she is left to wander through different game worlds. She started streaming around April under the name Miko Glitch before switching over to CodeMiko, which was probably a good idea since searching for Miko Glitch today would have returned mixed results with this character. What? Miko is modeled in Maya and textured in Substance. She then uses Unreal Engine to create all of the environments, animations, and interactions. Basically the whole thing is programmed to run like a game. She purchased an Xsense MVN motion capture suit for around $13,500. And that's with a 50% independent developer discount. Damn! She uses the app Live Link Face on her iPhone to capture the facial tracking data and it feeds directly into Unreal Engine. And she does this all by herself, for the most part. And yes, she is a real female.
I am a girl. Yeah, I'm a girl!
Now, let's take a look at how all of this fits within the context of the whole VTuber and virtual influencer landscape. Early creators like Ami Yamato and Kazuna AI helped to popularize the idea of a virtual avatar. This paved the way for more developers, which brought in more content creators, which inspired even more development, and so on. Now, with free VTuber software readily available, coupled with minimal hardware and some design skills, anyone can dive right into becoming a VTuber. This past year alone, we've seen an explosive growth in popularity within the Western VTuber space. From independent artists and creators bringing all different types and flavors of personalities, to VR enthusiasts, to massive VTuber talent agencies, they've all helped to prove and legitimize the interest in both 2D and 3D virtual avatar content. So much so, in fact, that it even enticed non-VTuber creators to give it a try.
Why are you, all of a sudden is it a problem about my looks? We have done hundreds of streams.
Virtual influencers, on the other hand, are created with such high-quality CGI work that it blurs the line between reality and fiction. Their interactions with their audience is not as direct as that of VTubers, since their purpose is more about selling a lifestyle and working directly with other influencers and brands. So where does Miko fit into all of this? Well, considering everything that she's developed, I would say she's probably in a category of creators that doesn't even have a name yet. And I'm not just talking about the 3D technology. AI Angel is another example of a creator who uses motion capture technology for her content. But beyond the tech, what really makes Miko and the technician unique is her ability to tell a bigger story. And I think this is where you really get to see CodeMiko's strengths. Unlike VTubers, who use anonymity to help their character and personality shine, CodeMiko's personality is a blend of two worlds. Literally.
Again?
In the virtual world, Miko invites guests on for interviews.
From a bunch of credit cards that you're getting screwed on.
Hi, little head right there.
Like a little baby bird in its nest. That's so cute.
She can change into different outfits and skins and can summon props.
Hello, funny man!
Guys, that sword prop was $7,000.
I don't know why they would. That's what I'm saying. Okay, see, there are dead bodies all over the floor.
No, that's your imagination.
All right, so I have no idea how you respond to CodeMiko, but I can tell you that this is where things are going.
Never seen that before.
Yeah,
That's wild.
It is wild, and there's an enormous community around this, and so we're at the hour. But I'll just say, like, what things look like going forward are unlikely to look like what they have looked like previously. If you're looking for sites of innovation in the arts, it's happening in Shenzhen. It's happening in Indonesia. The The curators for the Documenta Festival are coming out of Indonesia. It's a small collective there. It's coming out of Kinshasa. Like it's coming out of places where the creative talent has always existed, but the technologies to augment and amplify their perspectives have not. And what we're seeing is there are folks that are going to be trying to recapture and amplify within the existing structure of the arts world. And then we will see those like CodeMiko who hack together elements using both augmented intelligence and some artificial intelligence as well, and then their own natural personality in order to generate new forms for much larger audiences than we're traditionally accustomed to in Canada. So I'll break it there because I know we're on the hour. My apologies that we had to cut that a bit short. But I'm happy to hang out if folks have any questions, and I'm also very happy to share work by artists in AI that are doing good things. Carolyn Sinders in Berlin is doing amazing work. Rafik Anadol from Turkey is doing amazing things as well, but more than happy to share others. So thank you very much for the time today.
Oh, thank you very much, Jerrold.